What's up, everyone? This is Destroyer229, and today I want to go over an event that I've been seeing a lot of on Reddit that doesn't have an official news post, but is something that is actively being worked on. According to Reddit, and this is mostly going on through Discord, so I'm mostly getting this from secondhand responses, but there are some JMods, specifically Mod Stu and Mod Sheba, that are working to declutter Lumbridge. This is a massive sort of undertaking that is meant to bring Lumbridge a lot more closer to how it was originally prior to the Battle of Lumbridge, which was the first world event that happened back in 2013. I've looked over quite a bit that the proposed changes are seeking to do, and a lot of it is good. Some of it is like, I'm not sure if you should really touch it, and some of it is, this is a concern, and I hope that they change it prior to launch. So what I am doing is that there is a lot of this information that's been compiled in the RuneScape Wiki, and so we're going to go over this line by line, and I'll give my thoughts as to whether I think it's good, whether I think it's bad, whether I think it should just stay as is, and just offer my personal feedback on this proposed change. So here is the upcoming updates page on the RuneScape Wiki. This is actually quite a lot of details. All of this is the proposed changes. Starting from here. So, there's a lot to go over. So, like I said, we'll go over this line by line, and I will give my personal thoughts and my personal feedback on what these proposed changes look like. And thankfully, this is work in progress and subject to change. So, hopefully, the feedback from this and other people that I've seen on Reddit, and also Discord, but I don't generally check the Discord, hopefully, some of these changes will be addressed. So, first off, going home to Lumbridge. New players land in Lumbridge. Honestly, they should. Lumbridge should be the starting area. Burthrup and Taverley are all really nice in terms of all of the different skilling changes there. But Lumbridge is just the quintessential starting area, and it is going to be nice that that is going to be where players will land once they get off Tutorial Island. New accounts other than Group Ironmen who retain the Iron Enclave, blah 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 blah, now begin their adventure at the Lumbridge Lodestone, bypassing the Burthrup and Taverley paths. So basically, they start off at the Lumbridge Lodestone rather than the Burthrup Lodestone, which, okay, fine, all goes with changing the tutorial area to Lumbridge. End of Tutorial Island in Davendale is suitably updated, that's to be expected. Getting Iroh on the Iron Enclave to downgrade you to Standard Mode now transitions to Lumbridge rather than than Burthrup, then, okay. A lot of these are all just general changes for what it means to change the starting area to Lumbridge. This, I think, is going to be exceedingly important. Choosing I played very recently at Was Your Experience no longer skips the tutorial. Thank you. For those of you who've seen my anniversary of the account video, you'll know that I've been working on an account restriction series, and I've been working on it ever since May. And one of the big things that I was very puzzled by when I first began was I just skipped the tutorial, which was something I was very confused by. So I said that I have a lot of experience. I played very recently because I have an active account. And so just automatically skipping Tutorial Island was just jarring to me and was really irritating because I was really hoping to be able to get footage for things like, say, the hotspot. And I couldn't do that because the game just jumped me straight into Burthrup. So, no longer skipping the tutorial like that, perfect. That really irritated me because that was footage that I could no longer get. Since there's no longer transition from Tutorial Island to Burthrup, and the Burthrup arrival cutscene have been removed. That's fine. Again, just changing to what it is to start in Lumbridge now. Stu's willing to choose so with consent and confirmation. So this is just more of the skipping tutorial aspect. That is good. Actively saying, are you sure you want to skip the tutorial, rather than you just click a button and then it immediately jumps you into Birthrup. Perfect. Absolutely wonderful change. Make sure that this happens. Birthrup and Taverley start points are now listed further down to reflect starting in Lumbridge. That's fine because they are quite a bit further away from Lumbridge. You would expect to go to Varrock or Alcarid or Draenor long before you would go anywhere near Birthrup or Taverley. So perfectly fine with that. Lumbridge is listed above Birthrup in Death's Respawn. That's fine. The 9 basic challenges are a lot more generic and less specific to Birthrup. Also fine, since it just reflects those changes. Buff the life point damage of Birthrup trolls that even for the Birthrup players were underbalanced. So basically just making trolls actually a little bit more threatening, as opposed to just being very easily wiped out from a level 3 straight off Tutorial Island. Again, all of this is good. I like all of this stuff. I have zero complaints. I hope all of this kind of goes as anticipated. Decluttering the Lumbridge lodestone. The Lumbridge Sage has learned some lessons from his old school counterpart and now has more dialogue to assist new players, such as where to find quests, what monsters to fight, where to make money, find a bank, all just very simple tutorial stuff that is now updated. So, all of that, perfectly fine, great for new players to have some sort of in-game way of telling them all these things. The event notice board is permanently mapped near Lumbridge, Varrock, Fort 4 and 3, the Tower of Voices, blah blah blah, have been removed. Honestly, a little bit of shame because you kind of see what's happening, but honestly, it's fine. A lot of stuff can be found just with the calendar in the events tab anyway. So overall, was never really necessary. You can find that in a bunch of other places from the Jagex launcher or just the lobby. So honestly, it's fine. There's a lot of other ways that you could get that information. The talking pair of inactive villagers have been removed. Not sure why, but I guess just removing stuff that doesn't really need to be there. That becomes a bit more of an issue later on, but the 2 NPCs that are just talking there, that's fine. Iron Enclave portal is now visible only if you can access it. Again, also fine. Just weird that you could see this random portal in the Lumbridge castle walls. So, again, all this, fine. It's fine. This can all go as stated. I have no issues with this at all. Declare Lumbridge Castle. The castle wall has been rebuilt once again encircling the castle with access points from the west guardhouse and east entrance. That's okay. It does seem weird that the wall of Lumbridge just kind of has the whole back area completely vulnerable, I guess you could say. So rebuilding that is perfectly fine. A barrier's been reinstated between the Lumbridge Swamp and the town and forest. This is the first thing that I'm kind of iffy about, because the barrier before is just a fence. So what I'm hoping is that the barrier is a bit more natural, I guess. Something that feels more like a strict natural barrier rather than just a generic fence. Because a generic fence really just doesn't seem like it should just be the barrier between the Lumbridge Forest and the Lumbridge Swamp. So if it's something a bit more natural, just like something jutting up from the ground that's, say, too steep to climb over, or maybe like a little chasm that would be too big for you to go over, and of course it's not an agility shortcut, so you can't jump it. Something that's more natural to the environment than just a wooden fence, I would be okay with that. But just putting a wooden fence back like it is in old school, you may as well just leave them just easily accessible. The poll booth at the banks have been removed since active voting can be accessed from the community interface. Yeah, it'd be great if we could actually get some voting. That would also be really nice. But again, that's fine. It's like the notice boards. This can be accessed pretty much anywhere, and there's ways of being able to find this stuff that isn't just at those polling booths. So I'm okay with having those removed just in all these places. In Lumbridge Courtyard, the Sage's backpack is now only visible when League Sage is visible. Basically, all of this is like, all the stuff that you see in Leagues will only be visible during Leagues, which, that's to be expected. Wouldn't expect to see the Sage just always there in the main game. Duck Quest debris now trails from the swamp through the cemetery rather than through the castle walls. Which, if you're going to put the walls back up, that makes sense. It just makes the pathing be more logical. So, overall, a little bit more dicey, especially with the whole barrier thing, but not really anything of too much concern. The Lumbridge Swamp. The Shattered Worlds Temple has been removed from the swamp and is now accessible at the Void Knight's outpost. I'm okay with that. Shattered Worlds was always just a really weird thing that just randomly popped up in the Lumbridge Swamp. So moving it to the Void Knight's outpost, where there's already lore established of random portals just opening up, especially random portals to other worlds, is fine, since it thematically does feel more appropriate to be at the Void Knight's outpost. Descartes' dialogue's been adapted to no longer reference that. Shattered Worlds host and quartermaster now have some dialogue in the first outpost investigation section in Quiet Before the Swarm. I really like that. Updating quests in order to make new additions feel involved, I'm perfectly okay with that. It also then retroactively makes the Shattered Worlds 5th Age content, technically. Since they would be involved in Quiet Before the Swarm. Quiet Before the Swarm is a 5th Age quest. So, it's interesting. It's really interesting the way that they basically retroactively made it part of the 5th Age. Not that most players really care about that sort of thing, but I find it interesting. The relocation, the shape of the coastline's been restored, that's fine. Thanks to relocation of Shattered Worlds, the entrance to the Lumbridge Swamp Caves and Rune Crafting Altar have moved back in locations somewhat reminiscent of their old school counterparts. Which, again, is also fine. They're basically just putting back to how they were before Shattered Worlds moved it. No complaints there. Entrance to the Lumbridge Swamp Caves is facing northeast instead of south. That's fine. It's honestly one of those things where some of these entrances, they were moved, but then they access instance areas in which those entrances don't make sense. Playing through Leagues and going up to Edgar's Cave, it makes zero sense because you enter it going south to north, but then you enter his cave going facing west, entering it from the east. It makes zero sense. So hopefully they can also address that at some point. So making the world have logical sense for directions, I'm okay with that. Pair of signs of the entrance to the swamp caves, warning of flammable gas and how to cope have been reinstated. That's fine for new players. Map to the surface connects it, so that's just connecting to the world map. That's also fine. Logging out of the Mighty Falls quest instance and tracking the Tears of Gothic's D&D no longer references the prior location. That's just updating it so that way you know where to find it. A reference to the crater in Evil Dave's spellbook has been modified, which, I don't know, like, I suppose it makes sense, but it's one of those weird things where Evil Dave's quest canonically takes place during the 6th Age. So you'd think that it should reference the crater? I don't know, that one seems weird to me. It's one of those things where sometimes things reference the old lumberyard where Fort 4 and 3 is. And it's just one of those things where I feel like in quest instances, it should still reference the old spot. And maybe as you approach, it puts you into that sort of instance. Maybe that's just a bit too much work for the scope of this. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I feel like the old aspects that would be relevant during the time of these quests should still be honored. So hopefully, maybe they could do that. But again, that could just be outside the scope of what this can do. Feedback message when using the talismans now in an info box rather than the player chat. That's fine, I guess. Couple inconsistent coordinates in making history have been updated. Again, fine. You're just kind of fixing errors that were kind of moved through moving everything around. The Lost City Adventurer Quartet and their camp moved back to their original location, and the Leprechaun Swamp Tree a similar distance. Some tree stumps have been added south of their camp, similar to old schools, to visually storytell the quartet having chopping down nearby trees. I like that. Visual storytelling, always a plus. I'm perfectly okay with that. Entity icon's been added to the Leprechaun Swamp Tree context, so it's easier to distinguish. I'm not entirely sure. Oh, it basically is just making it visually more obvious than just chop instead of chop down. Okay, well, I guess that's fine. And then this one's probably one of my favorite ones. The adventure has been graphically updated. Cool. Making NPCs match the overall area, I am always going to be in favor of. Because that is the next logical thing for visual upgrades to be. We're upgrading all of these different areas to have visual consistency. We need to update NPCs to then also match. So this is always going to be a plus. Now, if only we can get Xanic to be visually consistent across the entire game, that would be great. But one step at a time, I guess. The Nexus has been removed. This is weird to me. Honestly, the Nexus really isn't all that important, all things considered. It's a weird prayer method. The Nexus Has You achievement has been converted to Herald the Dawn, but that's just simply from removing content. And then all these are just removing all these things, like removing Ysondria to Father Ernie. Honestly, I feel like with the Nexus, it could just be moved elsewhere. I almost feel like it would feel more at home if you put it in Mauritania. If you put it somewhere within Mauritania, probably... I'm trying to think where would be a good place to put it in Mauritania. Honestly, you know what? If we're not going to be using that area there, maybe where Sleep would be? Maybe you could put the Nexus there? Because currently Sleep doesn't exist and there's no landmass for where Sleep would be. So maybe just moving the Nexus there could be an option. I mean, it just seems weird to me for removing content altogether. But then again, they've done that when it comes to Tuska. Just kind of getting rid of outdated content always kind of feels weird to me. But it does seem to be somewhat the direction that Jagex is going with at the moment. There's just some sort of weird lore that maybe you could tap into, but the fact that they haven't really done anything with it, and it seems like they don't plan on it, maybe it's for the best? I don't know. It just always leaves a bitter taste in my mouth when they try to remove content just because it's outdated. So, I don't know. Weird to me, but overall, I'm not going to lose too much sleep over losing the Nexus. The well in the south of Lumbridge Castle has been removed since the well in West Lumbridge has been reinstated. More swamp frogs have been added. That's good, just because Leagues really needed more types of those NPCs there for those early tasks. The swamp frogs have been graphically updated. Cool! Love it. Nettles have been graphically updated. Okay, fine. There are fewer giant rats that have precisely 3 arrows. There should be one. I think it's okay if you remove duplicates, though, because, yeah, it seems weird that there's always just several giant rats that have 3 arrows stuck in them. So, I'm okay with that change. Declutter Lumbridge East. The god statue has been moved to northeast of Falador in view of the Crossroads overlook. I feel mixed about this. Simply because, thematically speaking, Falador is a lot more religious than Lumbridge. So having a god statue for what should be Ziliana there feels more appropriate. The problem I have is that you have Taverley right there. The Taverley statue is like 30 seconds away. Even less when you surge and dive. So I'm not sure what to feel about having those statues be so close together. Maybe it would make more sense if it was in Varrock. Varrock might work better for like a Zilliana statue because it's still a Saradominus city. So if you kind of have it... I'm trying to think where exactly would be a good place for it that wouldn't feel too, like, cramped. And I guess there is... Actually, you know what? There is an uninteractable statue that is between... I forget what the name of the NPC is, but it's where Juliet's house used to be. That and the ruined hut where you go down to where the hill giants are. There's an uninteractable statue there. Honestly, I feel like you could just replace that with Copernicus, and that could be the Zilliana statue. That's basically just, it's close enough to Varrock, especially with it being so close to the Grand Exchange. I feel like that might work better, because then there's a lot less stuff that's being cramped around Falador, and especially without it being so close to Taverley. So, I think if you moved it closer to Varrock, I would feel better about this, rather than having those statues be really close together. Part of the Lumbridge guards on the bridge over the River Lum have been moved to the Goblin side, as their former position might suggest the bridge was impassable. That seems weird that players would think that, but you know what they say about the average... Think about how dumb the average person is. So, honestly, if they've been getting feedback about that, more power to them. Damaged floor tiles have also been repaired. That's fine. Piglet has been found new home. That's fine, I guess. Alright, next is the Lumbridge Market. So, overall thoughts about this one... Don't put the statue in Falador. It's way too close to the one in Taverley. And South Falador, I feel like it would make more sense, but they also plan on decluttering that, so... Just move it closer to Varrock. That's all I'd have to say about that. Otherwise, everything else is fine. The market's been tightening up with fewer duplicate stalls and wandering NPCs. And the NPCs that stand in place and converse are now pickpocketable. I'm not sure about removing duplicate stalls. Though, admittedly, the refresh on stalls, especially since they're all low level, it's probably fine. It's not going to be something that takes a long time, like the precious gem stalls, or silver. So, I guess that's fine. And then having just the NPCs that are pickpocketable also around the same area, that's also fine. You basically just make the area dedicated to, this is the early game thieving training spot. And it's all concentrated in this one area. That's perfectly fine. I think if you just kind of consolidate everything there, that's perfectly okay. Also graphically update the remaining 5 citizens, the stall merchants, and the master farmer, who now wanders a shorter distance from the seed stall. Not sure how I feel about that, because stalls can be really annoying to try to get. I've tried thieving in the Ardoing market, and the layout there just makes stealing cakes nearly impossible. So, hopefully they make it so in that way it's not too difficult for new players to be able to steal from the stalls. So, we'll see. Since the castle wall's been reinstated, consequently remove the less accessible pickpocketed men and women immediately north of the castle. So again, it's just trying to focus players to go to the market for all the thieving training, which is fine. Weird lighting has been removed. Okay, just stuff under the hood. The 2 trained dummies at the market have been removed since it's no longer part of the Combat Academy. That's fine. Like I said, normally I'm against trying to remove outdated content, but because the Combat Academy was already gone, and really you have War's Retreat, it's just a little bit unfortunate that you wouldn't really have that for a new player, but I feel like as a new player, you also wouldn't really need to know that at that point. So, you know what? I'm fine with that. And then changing the achievement to match accordingly. That's okay. Lumbridge Fish Shop has been rotated so the entrance faces the market, so it makes more sense story-wise. Just kind of more, I guess not really story, but environmentally, it makes more sense for it to face the market. Though it still has the side entrance, so it's still accessible for the prior entrance. So, perfectly okay with that. Herald has been moved, and proclamations have been lessened. I'm wondering if that's going to be for all the heralds or just the Lumbridge one. You completed the achievement, and they have a dialogue to mute. Okay, that's fine, I guess. Now, this is definitely the biggest sticking point in the entire thing. Remove the Rebuild-a-thon Memorial Fountain. Do not do this. This was entirely a community event that was done during the Battle of Lumbridge, and the whole point is for it to be a memorial in-universe for all of the people who died in the Battle of Lumbridge. And this was just a community event. It was one of the different things that was part of the side activities that happened during the Battle of Lumbridge. So, it feels really bad to try to remove something that players specifically went out of their way to create and make sure that this was a thing that happened, and just getting rid of it entirely, especially since it makes sense from a story perspective. You want to have some traces of the Battle of Lumbridge, and that's probably my biggest complaint about this, is that it's basically eradicating every mention of the Battle of Lumbridge, and I don't think that that should happen. Yes, you can lessen its physical impact on the world, but don't get rid of it entirely. I've noticed that some people have mentioned that just move the fountain to basically replace one of the fountains here in the Lumbridge courtyard. I think that would just be fine. If you just simply removed one of those fountains and replaced it with the memorial fountain, that would be okay. That feels less intrusive, and it's still close enough to where the Battle of Lumbridge actually took place. It feels like it's still thematically appropriate without it just randomly being just close to the market. So, I am on board with a lot of people just saying, do not remove this. Move it if you have to, but don't get rid of it entirely. And the next two are also just weird things that just feel odd to get rid of. The Ceredominus priest and his family are no longer renting the upper level of Jack's house and have moved on with their lives. I like the text there, but they're not really intruding on anything. And unless just their presence just introduces a bunch of glitches like Ratcatcher style, I don't see a reason to get rid of them. Same thing with the Zamorakian and Herbalist. They finally tired of their nefarious rustlings in their cellar. Honestly, kind of hilarious because that's where the Thieves Guild is. But again, I don't see the reason to get rid of them. Again, the only thing that these two do is remove every mention of the Battle of Lumbridge. And again, reducing its impact is one thing. That, I think, is something that can be easily accomplished to make it look more how people expect Lumbridge to look. But don't get rid of all of these things in their entirety. This was still a thing that happened. It's still something that should have an impact in world over a decade later. It's still within living memory for so many of people. So, very much, don't get rid of all of this entirely. Don't erase everything. Minimize it, sure, but don't eradicate everything. And then some untextured ground tiles have been corrected. That's just visual glitches. So this is probably the biggest sticking point of the entire thing, mostly from these 3 points. Do not remove these things. That is basically my biggest takeaway from this entire thing. Alright, next is Declutter Lumbridge West. It's been over 12 years since the Battle of Lumbridge. Nature and the Duke of Lumbridge's fairly taxing, but taxingly fair reforestation initiative have further reclaimed the crater. Adventurers with long memories will likely recognize certain signature elements in the rejuvenated forest west of Lumbridge. Basically, they're getting rid of the crater. They're getting rid of the crater and making it a forest again. Which, I feel like there should still be some small remnant. Don't just make it a giant freaking crater. But I think just having like a small grove of trees and where the center of the crater is, where there's now a lake, that's fine if you keep that. But don't get rid of it entirely. It doesn't matter how good your reforestation initiative is. There still should be some remnant of the crater. Immediately north of the dirt road is a ruined building on a hill. No. No, this is dumb. This is really, really dumb. So basically, they made a reforestation initiative and they put back the destroyed and dilapidated building. In what way does that make any sense? Like, yes, I get it. The whole point is to make the forest look exactly how it used to be and match it perfectly with old school. But no. No, that building was destroyed during the Battle of Lumbridge. If you're going to rebuild it, make it into an actual building. Which makes no sense because the whole point is that it's the ham hideout. So, honestly, the way that I see it... Moving on a little bit ahead, the Fanatics have replaced the trapdoor. The trapdoor can be found in its precise location in the Battle of Lumbridge. Honestly, just take the mine entrance that currently exists and move it to where it used to be. Instead of it being a dilapidated building, that's just where the, just forgotten or abandoned mine entrance is. Don't make it a building, because why would you make a reforestation efforts and then put back a dilapidated building? It makes zero sense. It honestly just makes zero sense and is really just kind of jarring considering what the impact of all of this should be. So just make it the mine entrance, don't worry about the building. Put the rest of like the spiders and the goblins back, that's fine. But just make it the abandoned mine entrance. That's fine. Yeah, pack of giant rats, making the Ceredomin's creatures' continued existence slightly less tolerable. They just really want to get rid of every mention of this. Rabbits are still a thing, albeit fewer in number, including one called Squiggles. I really hope that what that means is that Squiggles is there among the few, because this is just another in-joke, and honestly, we should keep in-jokes. That's like, if what this is saying is that they're getting rid of Squiggles, that's like simply just removing the examine on the Timbo tree. It's an in-joke. Keep the in-jokes. Will newer players not get it? I mean, sure, because they're new players. But if they kind of dig into the RuneScape history and that sort of thing, like, I don't see any problem keeping it just inoffensive in-jokes. Especially since it's just this rabbit that can't be attacked and has a weird examine. It might cause people to look into why does this rabbit feel this way. So, hopefully, fewer in number, including one called Squiggles. Hopefully that doesn't mean we're getting rid of Squiggles. A unicorn features in the Southwest for no immediately apparent reason. Okay, fine. And then they just put the mugger back, which is weird, but alright. Once again, Ham, like I said, just move the mine entrance back to where the building is and don't put the building back. That building's long gone. Just make it a mine. It changes nothing about the Ham hideout itself. The old mine entrance has been cleared away. Just move it. Literally just move it. Dialogue in Quest Journal once again describes a Ham hideout as infested with spiders and goblins. That's fine if you're putting them back in there. Animation when picking the lock has been fixed. Lumbridge farming tree is back to its original location just west of the castle, as opposed to being really close to the river. I mean, that's fine, I guess. I don't really see much of a reason to really move it, but there's a lot of other things to argue about. This is one that I'm willing to just let go. It can move back to how it was before. When the Christmas quest next activates, the pixie will be on the dirt road. Again, just kind of moving NPCs where it would make sense for the updated look. Since the forest west of Lumbridge once again bears little resemblance, various accessible text referring to the crater that isn't linked to a specific period has been updated to reference a forest west of Lumbridge. I mean, if the whole point is basically, like, it takes place in present day and the crater no longer exists, then I guess that's fine. It's just one of those things where it's like, it feels like it's more just erasure in general that the crater ever existed. So, it's one of those things where it's like, if it's similar to what it was with the Lumberyard, where just continued references to Lumberyard makes sense since it doesn't exist anymore, then, okay, fair enough. Line the preacher's dialogue referring to West Lumbridge Forest as a crater in the present tense has been corrected. Basically, again, it's no longer a crater, it's just a forest. So, okay, I guess, since it's no longer a crater and it's still present day. Alright, now we're moving to the northwest. Remnants of a fence near the north road from Lumbridge to Drainer have been adapted into a potato patch. Alright, just fixing geometry, I guess. The duck pond northwest of Lumbridge Forest has been moved to a position north of the restored Ham ruins, resembling its original location and shape. Honestly, I feel like the pond that's already there should just still be the duck pond that's there. I don't see a reason why we need to replicate how it used to look 100%. Replicate it 90%, but just have a few minor changes. There used to be a pair of benches. The bench that wasn't replaced can now be sat upon. That's nice. Easter egg in the Lumbridge crater during the Easter event has been moved. Makes sense if the crater technically will no longer exist. Attempting to close the west gate of the wheat field no longer triggers nothing interesting. That just sounds like a glitch that they're just fixing. Feedback message, that also just sounds like an interface sort of glitch. And a U-tree map icon has been added. That's fine. Declutter, Lumbridge, and beyond. This is another one that I am very much opposed of. To reduce the overworld map clutter, particularly in free-to-play, 12 fish flingers fishermen and their D&D heticons have been removed. 3 remain in members' areas. The Deep Sea Fishing Hub, the Fishing Guild entrance, and Isla Anglerine. I do not like this at all, because what this does is effectively lock fish flingers out until you can access the Fishing Guild. Because the guy is right here, inside the Fishing Guild. And they say the Fishing Guild entrance, so I looked to see, like, is there actually just a guy here outside the entrance? And no, he's just right here. So, locking fish flingers out arbitrarily to just be accessible from the Fishing Guild seems like a weird choice. Because the Deep Sea Fishing Hub is also only accessible from the Fishing Guild. And Isla Anglerine is only accessible from the fishermen that are there. You can't access this ordinarily except through their teleports. So locking fish flingers behind access to the Fishing Guild just feels like an arbitrary requirement that they're adding in. So what I would do for this, if we still want to just remove most of the fishermen, I would say you would want to keep them in some of the more popular fishing areas. So what I would do would be, you basically have, I guess, 4 spots. One is still the Fishing Guild entrance, which also covers the Deep Sea Fishing Hub. You would have one right outside Hemminster, which is still relatively close because it's just right here. But it feels narratively relevant since, you know, there's the whole fishing contest that's here. So if you just put him, like, right here, right by where you would enter for that quest, I feel like that would be fine. And then the other 2 spots, one would be Catherby, because Catherby is a very popular fishing spot. So keeping the fisherman that's there would be fine. And then finally, just have one by the Gunner's Guard, or Barbarian Village fishing spot. Having one there, since that's still a pretty popular fishing spot for just power training fishing, I think that's fine just keeping one there. And then that's it. Maybe also having one more in Menafos would be fine. I would say just one in the Ports District, rather than locking him behind the VIP section. But I think that's fine. You still reduce so many of them. So basically, you would take 15 down to what seems like 5. So there's the Fishing Guild, Hemminster, Catherby, Barbarian Village, and Menafos. I think that would be fine. You reduce the clutter, and you still make it relatively accessible in some of the more popular fishing areas. So, yeah, at the very least, just keep 1 or 2 that are accessible outside the fishing guild. Don't add the fishing guild to be a arbitrary requirement for fish flingers. Fish flingers is already annoying to do. Don't add in more annoyance to it. The next one's also weird. Removed the news. Goblins are conducting a raid broadcast that occurred every 30 minutes if not disabled. This feels weird because they're just basically removing the broadcast entirely. So that's odd because the broadcast is already disabled by default. And so now you have no means of knowing when the goblin raids are. So that's cool, I guess. It just seems really weird because you already have a solution to that, and the solution is activated by default. So why remove the notification entirely? There are other things that you could probably try to update, like, say, sinkholes or something like that. Just seems weird that they would just remove that entirely when it's already off. A feedback message when a free-to-player interacts with some members' content now occurs before opening the membership benefits tab instead of simultaneously. That's fine. You let the player know that, hey, this is a members thing, and then it goes, do you want to do membership? As opposed to clicking on it and going, hey, you want some membership? So, that's fine. Citizen dialogue in Lumbridge that referred to the Battle of Lumbridge has been minimized, so removing stuff from a bunch of other NPCs. I don't know. I feel like you could probably get rid of a lot of the dialogue from a lot of these NPCs. And the NPCs that would probably remain to really talk about it would be like the Ceredominus priest and the Zamorakian herbalist. Just have them be the ones. As well as the Ceredominus dude who kind of goes over the cutscenes. Like, those would probably be the foremost front. Maybe have a few important NPCs that could mention it, like, say, Ceramic Vase or Duke Horatio. Just kind of the more important NPCs, as opposed to just people like Fred the Farmer or Hank. I don't know. Like, I feel like some NPCs should still reference it. Issues in Donnie's dialogue suggesting quest areas, which refer to pre-rework versions of Ruined Mysteries and What's Mine It's Yours, have been fixed. Updating stuff for the changes that have happened, that's fine. Weird that they haven't, considering those changes happened a long time ago. Weird that they haven't been updated. A reference for completing tasks for cash has been corrected, that's fine. A runescape, when interacting with the trapdoor to explore Jack's cellar, has been corrected to Gielinor. Feels weird that there's still references to the world as RuneScape still out there. Then again, like, the whole, like, delivery system that's part of Tribal Totem, that's still referred to as the RuneScape delivery system, which I feel like that should probably be updated to the Gielinor or Gielinorian delivery system. Feels like another change that should be made. Citizen dialogue beyond Lumbridge that referred to it has been minimized. This affects a bunch of other people. Miss Schism's dialogue now references vampires instead of vampires. This one feels weird that it's been missed for so long, actually. And then, Till Death Do Us Part crater near the entrance to Death's office has been cleaned. I honestly never really noticed this crater. I never did the 2018 Halloween event. And apparently it had some lore significance, though not really a whole lot. The cutscenes can now be replayed from the Citadel alongside Missing Presumed Death, which is fine. And then, at the request of Mod Ramen, Victor the Goblin has also ceased to be. They killed him. They killed the Goblin who had a crush on Wendy. Which then comes to a bunch of other questions, which if Death Till Us Part is actually significant for a bunch of lore stuff, especially since it introduces, or at least seemingly introduces, the Four Horsemen. Why don't we just make mini-quest versions of the world events? And this, since it also was seemingly important and is also just a temporary event. If these lore-important events are very important, why don't we create instanced versions of these things for players to interact with, and then have them be requirements for stuff in the future? Like, say, the Battle of Lumbridge is required to then do Missing Presumed Death, which would, in essence, make that a free-to-play mini-quest. And then you have Burden the Beast and Tuska Comes both be members mini-quests that their requirements is just doing Missing Presumed Death. And then presumably also the 2018 event also just follows Missing Presumed Death. Actually, since it's 2018, that would actually be after Saliske's Endgame. So maybe that could just be a standalone thing, now that I think about it. But that's beside the point. If these things are so important that they actually have lore significance, instead of just minimizing all these things, why don't we actually just create mini-quests for these? They have to be mini-quests just because Jagex has mentioned that retroactively adding in quest points is problematic. So just make them mini-quests and then tackle them onto requirements for whatever would be necessary. So then those mini-quests would then be required for Missing Presumed Death, and then just adding them to then be requirements to do Saliske's Endgame. They're just one-off things that then would be required to then do the big finale, because it's very important. Which I guess the Burden of the Beast would then also then need to be a requirement for the Mighty Falls. Tuska Comes doesn't really need... I mean, I guess if it's... Tuska Comes then becomes a requirement to then access Mazcab, then maybe. Which I know we're adding in arbitrary requirements when I just mentioned about fish flingers. But honestly, making just short mini quests that could be done by anyone feels a lot more, accessible and makes a lot more sense than just locking an activity behind a higher fishing level. So basically making these lore important activities actually accessible to new players, or at the very least players who were not around during these things. It also then makes it so that way dialogue from these quests can still be used. So you have things like Saradomin, who references whether or not you supported or were against him in the Battle of Lumbridge. That can still be accessible to players, because they had to pick a certain side during the mini-quest. So it could then be the Battle of Lumbridge is then necessary for a requirement to do Death of Chivalry. So there's a few different ways that you can incorporate these sorts of things as requirements. I mean, I guess you could also use it as a requirement for meeting the locals, because you also... I guess it would make sense, because Higgs mentions that you were part of the Battle of Lumbridge. So it would make sense to just tackle that on as a requirement just because Higgs says you were there, which doesn't make sense to players anyway if they weren't there as part of the original event. So yeah, just tackling that on is just another requirement. Which again, if you make it just a short mini quest where you're just doing various odd job factions to take down relatively weak White Knights or Black Knights in order to help Saradomin or Zamorak, and then with the same thing with Armadil and Bandos, I feel like that would still give players context for what these events are, as well as actually making them important to make sense within the story. So if this stuff is important, make it into a mini quest. That way players can have some taste of what it was for that experience. And then if they're doing quests in a certain order, they actually have context for events that happened. All of that likely outside the scope of this project. But if Jagex is looking at a lot of feedback, I think making these into short mini quests would then make sense for grand narrative scale. So that is the end of all of this. Honestly, a lot of it is really good. I do like the majority of these changes. It makes Lumbridge look a lot more like its former self and makes it less jarring to people coming in from old school, or people who played RuneScape a long time ago, and so they come back to Lumbridge and they see it mostly how they remembered it, with a few different odd things that are changed here and there. But there are some things that honestly should be addressed, and some stuff that really shouldn't be removed. We shouldn't just completely eradicate all mentions of the Battle of Lumbridge. Or if you are, make it so that way people can access it in a certain context. Which again, mini-quests. Just make mini-quest versions of the world events, and I think you'd solve a lot of these sorts of issues that players have when it comes to these jumps in lore. But overall, I honestly do like a lot of this. A lot of this is really good. I think a lot of this does help declutter the world, which that is a big problem when it comes to RuneScape. You've got stuff in Lumbridge that's cluttered, Falador is cluttered, dear god, north of Ardoing is really cluttered. So just having these sorts of declutter updates, I think is always a plus. But there should be some instances where there might be some things that are taken too far, and that should be addressed, and that should be raised to the mods. So hopefully they will take it into consideration. But that's my feedback, and what do you guys think? What do you think of all these different changes? And are there certain things that you agree with, you disagree with, things that you want to keep, things that you just want to get rid of entirely? Go ahead and leave a comment below, and I'll see you all in the next video. So until next time, everyone, take care.